Okay, good morning. Well, and I'm just smiling here because I've had the opportunity to lead thousands of Marines, and I think I'm a little challenged and it's a little daunting with these fine executives today. But we'll go ahead and do some introductions. So again, thanks to IAC for the opportunity to conduct this panel this morning around health innovation. What I'm going to do to get us started off is I'm going to ask each of the panelists to start off and just spend a couple of minutes giving an introduction on their background, talk a little bit about their company or their firm and what they do, kind of what they bring to the health innovation space. And then we're going to get into a line of questionings. And I'll go ahead and start soliciting or chumming for questions here. So we're going to start off, once we get around the first round, we're going to have a discussion about the current state of innovation in healthcare. That's the first round. Second round, we'll talk a bit about impediments to improving health. And by the way, maybe after those first two rounds, we could probably seed in a few questions if you'd like. Next, we're going to talk about the relationship of government and industry. Surprise, we're at the IAC conference. We'll talk about the business transformation imperative for IT, and then we're going to wrap up with putting our futurist hat on and talk a bit about how we see healthcare about 10 years from now. So without further ado, and I'll make sure to keep you all in the right order, we have Casey Coleman first. Casey, you're Senior Vice President with Salesforce. Why don't you go ahead and start us off?
All right, so a little bit about my background in the context. With Salesforce, where I look after our global government customers, including healthcare customers, and here in the US, that's a lot of big institutions, but in other countries, that's the entire healthcare system. So it's an interesting vantage point to understand what innovation is taking place. Come at it from the background of previously being in the federal government, was with the General Services Administration for 12 years, including as the CIO. So have seen several generations of technology, and I'm very excited about where we are now with cloud technologies that give us the chance to do things in a much faster way with a lot less risk and start to prove the benefits of what can work. So I think the art of the possible is moving forward pretty quick.
Great, thank you. Mm-hmm. Greg Bateman. Greg's a managing director in the federal industrial ecosystem at Microsoft. Greg?
Hi, thanks, James. Nice to be here. So at Microsoft Federal, I look after a team of folks that work across industry-specific solutions for our federal customers. Federal is an interesting customer market, right? You've got health there, you've got retail in this market, you've got manufacturing, all with sort of a regulatory lens on it that's unique. And so we've got a number of experts on the team, including health, that worked in government and that aim to support our customers with their mission and applying technology, which these days is very cloud-centric and very much about artificial intelligence and how we do that.
Great. Alexandra Ehrlich. Alex is a principal solution consultant at Oracle.
I'm Alex Ehrlich. I am part of the strategy team with Oracle. My background is in biostatistics, and I started my career at the CDC. So I started my career with the federal and then slowly moved out to industry and now within technology. And my role at Oracle is really to bring in the user perspective. So if there's something that I did my whole career was really be in the trenches of it, and Oracle's doing a great job at really bringing in that perspective and taking technology that's being used across other verticals, maybe retail, maybe banking, financial use cases, and then really streamlining those to be relevant in healthcare. That's part of really the big innovation. The one thing that they're doing that's really exciting to me is cloud transformation. So healthcare lags behind, and we all know that, right, within technology. And what Oracle's doing is really helping our customers transform to the cloud, knowing that that's the future in a way that is not disruptive to current workflows. And that's really something we're passionate about, and everything that we're building within the stack is about making that transformation gradual and really bringing in value as our customers move in that direction.
Great, thank you. Bill Kessler is the Deputy Chief Health Officer and Lead Population Health Officer at IBM, and a former member of the Veterans Affairs Department.
It's a pleasure to meet you. I too started my career at CDC. I'm a recovering epidemiologist and a primary care physician. As you said, I'm Deputy Chief Health Officer at IBM, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer for our Government Health and Human Services division. We do a tremendous amount of work with our federal partners in terms of both supporting federal and state agencies as well as international governments in their work, and applying our data assets and leveraging the data assets of our clients and bringing in and attempting to integrate information around social determinants, around human services with healthcare data and other novel data sets in order to provide insights.
Great. KC Arvin is the Chief Information Officer at Palantir.
Hey folks, so I've been in the Valley, I'm a technologist, so I lead information security and information technology at Palantir, and prior to that I was at Facebook, so I know how to build disruptive things. With the hope of this panel, we'll build something that's disruptive and good, so that's the second part we need to sort out. Specific to Palantir, what we believe in is, we don't actually believe in AI, we don't believe in artificial intelligence, we believe in augmented intelligence. And the idea is that how can you bring machines and humans together to combine the best of machines and best of humans. So the best example for that is, have you folks seen the Iron Man movie? I'm sure you're awesome.
Yes.
So we think of ourselves as the folks who are building the Iron Man suit for the Tony Starks of the world. So you need Tony Stark over there. So you need the humans. So we think of building capabilities that will help people use software in a first-order way.
Great, thank you. And Vivian Lee is the President of Health Platforms at Verily Life Sciences. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. So I am also a physician by training, a radiologist, a recovering academic, where I actually first developed my respect and fondness for veterans, both through training at the VA system, and then of course as an academic working in health systems in close partnership with our VA hospitals. That's actually where I came to know Karen Clancy. And so when she called to invite me to, wrote to invite me to this panel, I was delighted to participate. I am also a member of the Defense Health Board for the DoD, so that continuum is very important to me. So at Verily, I joined Verily about a year ago, and we are the commercializing arm of Alphabet. We started as a life sciences company and then are now really focused on leveraging our data and analytics capabilities and our ability to organize that data, as well as build hardware, sensors, various technologies that can be helpful for patients in the home environment, for example, to manage their own conditions. And we're really focused on the roots of where healthcare started, the clinician-patient relationship, and how we can provide the data for both the clinicians who are caring for the patients, as well as patients and their family members and caregivers, to enable them to co-produce health, to work together to advance their health through data, through some novel sensors and novel technologies, and some of it just getting back to restoring that relationship. And so that's really what we're focused on.
Great, well thank you for that. And Bill and Vivian, as two alums of the VA system, remind me again, I should know this number, but what's the percentage of doctors and clinicians in the US that have at some point in their career migrated through the VA system? It's a high order of magnitude, I know that.
A huge amount.
Yeah.
And so not only did I work at the VA as a clinician, but I have to report a conflict of interest. I'm currently a veteran and currently a patient at the VA, so I have a vested interest in having the best care possible for veterans.
Excellent. Well, we're going to go into the round of questioning again. I think after about the second round, we can certainly start going to the audience and eliciting some questions. This will start off a bit iterative. We're going to suggest that, given the number of talented panelists we have here, probably not everyone is going to have to feel obliged to answer every question, but we'll take it as it comes, and then questions, and then at some point I think we're going to devolve into a bit of a conversation, and again we'll seed in some more questions. So just as a reminder, and again I'll let you jump in as you want, we don't have to go down the row here necessarily, but the first topic we'd like to address is around the current state of innovation in healthcare, and to kind of seed that, can you think about the one or two things leading up to this current state that you think have fundamentally changed healthcare?
I can take a little bit of that, at least in how we're thinking about it at Microsoft. You know, we've anchored what we're doing in healthcare around the quadruple aim. And one of the novel things about the quadruple aim is as opposed to the triple aim, right, is taking the clinician's experience into account. And that's something that we've always done at Microsoft is help people be more productive with the technology at the front end. And so you've seen certainly you know, the capability for people to build very innovative things, such as an EHR system, you know, on a common platform with APIs. And now as, you know, the web and all the capabilities you can get through that open access set of technologies, and the computational power of cloud is opening up a whole bunch of new kind of scenarios. And you did mention before, you know, the movement of some of your existing workloads to the cloud, and that's certainly a benefit. But I think we will all see that the benefit of the cloud is going to be much greater than that over time. And especially as you can apply what we call cognitive services, right, you know, or sort of in aggregate artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence. I do like that, Casey. I think that's a nice thing that keeps the human in the loop, right? We're just at the beginning of what can be possible there. And so we think, and I know I'm getting a little bit ahead of ourselves on the future thing, but you know, we do see things like, wouldn't it be neat if a doctor in an encounter with a patient, there were a bot in the background listening to that conversation and transcribing it and putting the notes into the EHR, right? We know that that's one of the things that docs struggle with quite a bit. I've recently had some exposure to, you know, to the medical scenarios, and you've got your station there, and you're, you know, just sort of turning and talking and then typing and turning and talking and typing, and I'm sure that gets old after a day's work, you know. And so technology can absolutely help in that area. And doing so, though, in the health market is regulation, patient privacy is paramount. And so there's a lot of importance paid, and I'm sure by all here on the panel, companies on the panel, to you know, the regulations that are important there, so whether that's HIPAA, high trust, you know, what we look at too is complying with things like the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations, that are a European sourced thing and extant in Europe and enforceable in Europe, but we are doing that worldwide as well, as privacy is certainly important to, you know, me as a patient. And so, you know, at a high level, the state of the art now is we're at the beginning of some really great things, I think, and that are even happening today, you know. And I'd love to hear from the rest of the panel as to what's happening with
Alex?
you guys.
Sure. I think we have different problems today, right? So I think the last 25 years were about collecting data. How do we get data? And now we have too much of it. And I think that's where we are right now is what do? We know the answers are there. We know that there's a lot of value, and we really want to realize the investment we've made in collecting the data. And I think that's where we are right now. It's in that transition of how do we really use all that information and translate that into benefit to the patients? We've been promising the patients that we're doing this for them. We've been promising them that every little bit that we're taking from them in terms of information is going to be returned to them. So I think that's where we are right now, is trying to figure out how to maximize that. And that's through analytics, that's through storage, that's through novel technologies, that's through AI, that's through a lot of different ways. But I think that kind of, the overview is that. It's just that transition of what problems we're dealing with.
Vivian?
Yeah, I was going to talk about a couple of efforts that have been going on within Verily in terms of the current state that are public. So one is a product, a diabetes management product called Onduo that was created out of a joint venture between Sanofi and Verily. It is a combination of hardware and software. So it's for type 2 diabetic patients. It includes a continuous glucose monitor that was built by Verily for Dexcom. And it's the world's smallest one, and you can put it on your arm or on your abdomen. And it lasts for about 10 days and just continuously measures your blood glucose instead of having to do the finger pricks. And then it transmits wirelessly to the app. And the app uses all kinds of technologies that we'll be talking about, AI, however you define AI. For example, for most diabetics, you have to keep a food log, of your meals and snacks in order to track your blood glucose and your medications and so on. Instead, the program actually just enables you to take pictures using your cell phone of your meals and your snacks, and it uses computer vision AI to automatically recognize those meals. And because it's a part of the a general Google tool, it now recognizes more than 1 million different foods. So as a point of engagement for patients, who wants to sit there thinking about their diabetes all day? This actually is a point of engagement for a lot of patients or a lot of people, because it's just fun to go into a Thai restaurant or some kind of an ethnic restaurant and see if it recognizes your meal, and it's a form of engagement. So you can track your blood glucose, look at your pictures, and for the patients, you're able to see the patterns. What meals, for example, we've discovered, I didn't know this, that milk and cereal is actually, I thought that was super healthy. That actually tends to bump glucose a lot more than just, say, some scrambled eggs, for example. So people can learn about it, and there's a chat feature where you can chat with a coach, and in some cases the coach is real, and in some cases a coach is more of a bot. So there is capability now in terms of, I know we often have these discussions about whether AI is really being used, whether there are real use cases, and I'm saying yes. This product was rolled out a year ago with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arkansas, South Carolina, and Georgia. And just as a sign to our commitment to really being value-driven and outcomes-based, the initial payment model was that we were only paid for reducing HbA1c. Mm-hmm. So only paid based on outcomes, which I think is an important new direction for us. The one other quick example, I know I'm going on too long, is there's another project that the company has been doing for a long time, which is a research project called Project Baseline, to collect every possible bit of data about a human being, whether it's your imaging, your genomics, your microbiome, patient-reported outcomes, and so on. And what's interesting, I think, in that space is the ability to try to figure out what actually is going to work in terms of engaging people in the technologies that we're building. Because we're all building these really wonderful technologies, but whether patients really find it meaningful and useful and it fits into their lives, or whether clinicians find it useful, I think we really don't know how to do that very well. But that's something that we're learning.
Arvin, I wanted to pick something that you said over coffee this morning, I think kind of segues nicely from Vivian's comments. If I'm quoting you correctly, you said this morning, we really don't have health care, we have sick care.
That's right.
And I don't know if you want to pick up on that.
Yes, so in terms of innovation, when Jim was asking this morning, I thought that the term healthcare was misleading, because healthcare is really to keep people healthy. What we have is sick care or disease care, which is when people fall sick, we take care of them. And the point of that was, if you think about innovations, there is of course technological innovations. I'm a technologist and I'm biased to that. But often you want to think about what are the strategic innovations that are possible. Because when you have the wrong strategy, how much ever you power it to technology, you're only going to make it more efficient, but you're making a bad thing more efficient. Whereas if you have the right strategy, you're going to make it much more effective. Right? And so I'd posit that unless we change such that the model becomes something where people are paid, people pay providers and payers when they are healthy and not when they are sick, we're only going to put band-aids to what is a broken system.
It's very encouraging to me you brought that up. My eyes lit up when you mentioned that this morning, because Arvin said, the first question is really around your strategy, right?
Right.
In a town, whether it be Silicon Valley or Washington, D.C., everyone wants to jump on the technology right away. And let's talk about it from a people process, a policy, a strategy framework before we just dive on a technological solution. Right. Bill, did you want to jump in?
Certainly.
Yeah.
So oftentimes innovation is equated to disruption. And I think that's a different model in healthcare. Healthcare is not like the sidewalk where you can put a bunch of cute scooters and let government figure out how to help elderly people and pedestrians get around that. I mean, we're talking about people's lives. So it's less the gadget, Jim, as you said, and it's much more the people. It's much more about enabling everybody within healthcare, the providers, the business folks, the patients and caregivers, to work in multidisciplinary teams, to be able to deal with the complexity of 21st century healthcare and health. And it's really more about culture than it is about strategy. You can't take these complex technologies and parachute them into dysfunctional workflow and expect people to get the best out of the technologies. We need to be able to look at the workflow and transform the workflow as we adapt to the technologies. And for that, we need to change culture.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that. There's been several examples of large EHR migrations, for instance. I won't mention the guilty or the big smoking holes, as some people refer, but I know that, like, in our approach with our current vendor, we are taking almost 2 years before we even go live in one site. And as I mentioned, 500, a room that was like twice the size of this, the clinicians going through the training, going through the change management before we start to introduce the technology that's going to support those workflows to get that in the right order.
Yeah, I think that you've hit right on the point I was going to make as well, Bill, is it really is about culture. Because if we were starting today to create healthcare systems, we'd do it very differently. But we have what we have. We have a set of systems and a lot of data. And the question now is, how do we connect the dots and orient things around the patient? Because today, systems are set up to serve their own functional teams and their own functional processes. And sort of left to fill the gaps is the patient. And I think people expect more now. From every other industry, we expect a different experience. And so the challenge is, how do we bring that? And I think there's a lot of success stories, but scaling those and then replicating them is our next challenge.
Absolutely. So I think you've kind of segued us in the next topic area, which is good. We wanted to talk a little bit about what you all see more directly as the major impediments. We've talked about the current state and kind of how we got to where we are. What do you see as we move forward, the major impediments, not only within your industry, within your customer and client base, but also across the government? And how do you see that we might overcome some of these? Mission impossible, not mission hard, right?
I can start.
Go ahead.
Off. So I think there are two categories of impediments, right? The one is technological, and second is slightly different. The technological impediment that I see a lot is how do you get very quick time to value? And for that, it is a function of there's large amounts of data, but a huge amount of this data is very siloed. And then unless you break the silos across this data, you're not going to unleash innovation, right? So I think that's one big impediment that we see is make the data work for you as opposed to collect data. So often people talk about big data, but big data is not the hot thing. What is really useful is right data. And right data requires that you convert big data into something that's useful. So that's the first big impediment that I see. The second big impediment that I see, especially where I wear a Silicon Valley hat, is I'm a technologist, not with a healthcare background, but there's way too much jargon. There is way too many acronyms, and it creates a barrier to entry for most people who want to contribute and innovate in the space, because they need a PhD to demystify the amount of jargon in the space, right? And if you take an IT person who loves 3-letter acronyms and healthcare professionals who love 3-letter acronyms, you have all permutations of 3-letter acronyms that are possible, right? So, and I think that just makes it much harder for us to reason in simple terms.
By the way, when I was in DoD, we didn't refer to them as silos. We called them cylinders of excellence.
I will use that.
And acronyms, you knew you arrived with acronyms when you could say an entire sentence comprised of acronyms, at least one of which was a complex acronym. But thanks for that perspective. Who else?
I wanted to, so on the silos, I think I'll take that a little bit, farther and say that it's the uncertainty that we have around healthcare and what we're supposed to be measuring and what's important and what we're supposed to prioritize, because our customers know that they have to break these silos, but they don't know where to start because they don't know we're always trying to catch up in healthcare. And with the uncertainty of what we're measuring, what's going to be important, what our payment models are going to look like, all those things, we're kind of in a hurry up and wait situation at all times with the analytics. So it's hard to realize the value and the speed, right, to value is delayed by not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. So there's a hesitation to go all in because of that uncertainty, and I think that's a huge impediment both to the uptake of technology, to the development of technology. So I think that's one thing that...
Bill, what do you think? I know we talked over coffee again this morning about, and I'm really encouraged as a technologist about the number of clinicians that are informaticists, right? The folks that really understand what they want and what they need to get their process right. I don't know if that's a stepping stone for you to...
Thank you. So we've seen with the first generation of technology, EHRs, what happens when technology and technologists just build things because they can and because it makes sense without the clinicians. So I'm a big advocate for having clinicians at the table, leading this, understanding their patients' needs, understanding the workflow and the logic and the theory of practice of health and sick care. And so, again, riffing off of what you said, we need to have people who are bilingual, who have one foot in each camp, and we need to be able to catalyze that multidisciplinary work between clinicians who have to be at the table and brilliant engineers and technologists. And if I could also just the folks beside me have talked about data and data silos. It's been said that in the 21st century with machine learning and AI, that data is becoming the new oil. And so we've got to figure out ways to make data accessible to everybody to prevent these walled gardens or data blocking. And again, coming from a public health perspective, we absolutely need that data. We need the free flow of that data. We need it as a common good so that everybody can apply and learn from them. And I'll challenge you and the rest of you in the audience, that's in which government can help, is to figure out ways to make data free flowing.
Vivian?
I totally agree with what Bill has just said, and I also think that if we can successfully tackle the data issue, there's also a cultural difference between the technology sector, which I'm now new to, and traditional healthcare, as well as government. So kind of overcoming some of those cultural barriers, I think, will really unleash a tremendous amount of innovative capability. But one of those examples is just simply the approval process of being able to come up with an innovative idea, and then how we can actually implement that successfully with our VA partners. Just the bureaucratic hurdles are a little bit overwhelming for those of us, I guess, on the tech side. I'm sort of sitting next to somebody who's genuine tech, but as somebody who's sort of new to tech, there's such a culture clash, you know. Yes, we will get your CRADA through in maybe the next 6 to 9 months, and then we can talk about the next phase of this potential innovative partnership. We need to, I think, tackle some of those.
I really appreciate the focus on culture. Well, I think it was Deming, right, that said culture will eat strategy for lunch every day of the week, or something like that. Bill? Or not Bill, Bob. Greg.
I agree with everything that people have said here too, and note that VA and DHA have talked for a long time about sharing information, and I think it will happen eventually. And there's culture is part of that too. One of the other things that happens in this town, and I think all of you guys know about this too, is the acquisition process for things, which can be very, very time consuming and time bound, et cetera. And what's interesting, outside of VA and DHA, there have been some new ways to do things with OTAs, of the Transaction Authority, which HHS is authorized for, but I guess VA isn't, and I don't know whether that's going to be, the agencies authorized to use OTAs will be only those agencies forever, or whether Congress might see fit to actually open that up a little bit, because it has been a vehicle for some innovative application that I imagine VA would benefit from significantly, and and DHA as well. Although I think they are using some of the authorities that DoD has. So it can be a very politicized topic, in town. Health, it's very important to everybody in the room. But I think as more and more people understand that data is the oil, right, and that becomes even, aware on the people on the Hill, maybe we see some opening there of the silos. Oftentimes the silos are not really people, trying to hold things. It's funding. It's how Congress funds the programs, and things sort of, get stuck in these silos, and it starts at that level. Maybe we can see some change legislatively over time.
Well, Greg, I appreciate you highlighting the nature of the DoD-VA relationship. and as someone that used to have a foot in that world, I can tell you, Winston Churchill said, "But two countries separated by a common language." But in all seriousness, I'm actually very encouraged by our partnership. There have been some really accelerated developments around our collaboration within that common data enclave and stuff around our common platform. So that's for another panel and another venue, but I just want to say that I'm very positive on it. Casey?
Yeah, I just want to go back to this point about culture, Vivian, that you were raising, because I think that goes to sort of a risk aversion culture that's kind of predominant in this sector and in government as well. And I think it's predicated on the idea that we have to first do no harm, but doing nothing is also a risk, and it's I think it's something that's not as commonly understood. But taking little action or taking the least action is also going to have consequences. And so where we're seeing success is looking at not the hardest case problems, because those need solutions as well, but look at all the areas where there's opportunity to make change and to connect the dots on the administrative side or on the process side or on the collaboration between the clinical and non-clinical side. Those are areas where there's a ton of barriers and impediments and things that don't naturally work well together, where we could collaborate with small pilots and low risk and move quickly and bring about a lot of improvement that would create a culture and a momentum for change on the harder side of things.
Absolutely. Well, that's kind of the end of wave one. I wanted to open up and see if we had any questions on those two topics. And is there a microphone coming around, or are we? Okay. Why don't we wait for the microphone just so everyone can? And please, when you ask the question, if you could state your name and identify your organization or company.
Stanley Campbell, Eagle Force Health. More of a comment than a question. I remember about 30 years ago, in a classified environment at the CIA, maybe a little bit more, and a crack panel like this was in place, and there was a thing called the CMS group, which is the Noah's Ark of Intel. So 2 by 2 from every Intel place. And we were having the issues of interoperability, very hard problems, very sophisticated. At the time, this was before Palantir was 4 people. It was 2 people. Google was outside. They could not come into Intel because their collection was so heavy. And the way we were able to come up with a decision to how do we break these barriers, how do we get to fail fast, how do we take on some of the world's toughest problems with the largest amount of data ever collected, was that we had to put up an investment panel. So InQtel was the born of that logic. So now can you imagine this as a VA InQtel, where you have some of the best and brightest minds, some of the strongest and most competent companies, with investment from the VA, to where the ideas could have the logic of how it works in the government and the disruptiveness of how we actually get things done. And so if I send you back with anything, maybe that might be the one thing if we could come out of here with an investment. I'm positive all these guys would volunteer to be on the first board. But the logic of all is right there. We can just figure out a way to move a few of the dollars in place to be able to be successful fast.
You've just condemned all these fine people to future association with me. I don't think you wanted to do that, but did anybody want to react to that?
I think it's a good idea. It's interesting. We work with a lot of startups, you know, at Microsoft, and people that are looking to get into the health market. And telemedicine's a hot area now, right? And there's quite a few startups, Silicon Valley, doing telemedicine, but many of them are not in government yet. There is one that's, you know, we work with a lot, a company called Global Med that, you know, long ago cracked the code on telemedicine and is in VA, and they're a great company, and we love working with them, but I just note that there's not as much because people get put off by the regulation, they get put off by the acquisition cycles and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, the concept of a sort of a government-funded venture, you know, organization to get government health would be really interesting and maybe applicable, you know, broadly around the world at NHS and UK and elsewhere, right?
Can I comment? You said one of my favorite terms, and people are really scared of that, and it's fail fast. And I think that's what we need to do in healthcare if we want to be innovative. Some things are going to resonate, some things are going to take off, some things are not. And when we talk about disruptive technology, we get to hear all the great things that work, but we don't hear about the 99% of things that did not work. So we have to have the stomach for those 99 things to be able to get that success. So I do think that you need a setup that's a little bit more nimble and a little bit more resilient to fail fast. So I think it's a great idea. It's a great point.
I think so as well, and I think, like, I don't want to belabor this too much, but association and gym will also be fun.
Okay, next question.
Good morning. Joe Grace and Associates. The question that I have is, as a CIO that came into Navy medicine from the outside, so Jim, I applaud that, and by the way, it's good to have an academy grad doing that. As a submariner, I came in and looked at it from a systems perspective, and what I found is that there was very little interaction with industry to bring the good ideas forward, and that became one of the, we innovate, but we didn't have a methodology. When the submarine force was trying to go back and redo the Seawolf and the Virginia class, they brought in everybody, and you all have heard this before, because one of my pet peeves is that they brought in everybody that had ever thought about building a submarine, built a submarine, sung Yellow Submarine, and they said, how would you rebuild the submarine? And you think of doctors and clinicians and people that are locked in the way that they do business. The first thing they said is, why do we have a periscope? Okay, that's heresy. You got a John Wayne riding the scope up. It's the way you look through and you're higher and your hat's turned backward. They said, with a day of 360-degree cameras, instantaneous video, why don't we have flat panels and not have a guy looking through a single reticule with a certain eye? The new submarine doesn't have a periscope. The scope goes out, but it has flat panels. But the same people that gave the innovation were then able to bid on the opportunity. We didn't say, well, because you gave us the idea, you're OCI'd out. Now we're going to only let people that have never thought about this bid on this. So up there we've got Microsoft and Salesforce and people who worked in the VA, and a lot of the folks in the room were former CIOs, former military. How do you get the good ideas, Jim, to you to move, not just a pilot, but really move it? Because there's a lot of better ways to do it. Maybe we don't need a periscope, and maybe we don't need all the things that we're doing. How do we help you from industry? And what's the engagement model that you want from amazing people like that? You got former Secretary Peake in the room. You got a whole bunch of people here who do great things. How do we help this innovation? That's the question.
And maybe we don't need submarines.
We don't?
Yeah, that's right. No, but who wants to tackle that first? Anybody?
I'll just thank you. It's an art and a challenge to respond to an RFI. I'll just share that that's always that challenge, how much to put in, how much to withhold. And so anything that you could do to help with that would be great.
I would just say, having spent time in government and in industry, I feel like if I were to go back into government, I would have a much more informed perspective about how to engage with industry. One of the things that I wish I had made more use of, did make some use of, is market research and not trying to have an open dialogue well before you get to the point of needing to have some boundaries there because there's a procurement. You can do a lot under the auspices of market research, and you can do a lot in these kind of forums. It's just, it takes a very informed customer to do that kind of thing. So I think that's one takeaway I've got at this point.
Well, let me offer too. I think one of the biggest challenges inside the government, right, is moving to an agile development methodology, right? And we've had this conversation recently with an OINT, when our customers hear agile, they hear does not meet requirements, right? I mean, that's what they think. And so how do we get past that? Talk about blockers and obstacles, right, in culture. So because everything we've said around buy versus build and and meeting the baseline requirements and expanding from there, it's hard to get past that when your end customer says that doesn't meet my requirements.
Yeah, I'll probably add one more thing. Like, I struggle with the word requirements because requirements by definition means that I understand the problem, right? In most places, what you actually need is not solution definition, you need problem definition. So a good way to unleash the creativity is like get people involved at the problem definition, because once you define the right problem, the solutions are easy, right? But just like unleash innovation when you define the problem as opposed to asking people to provide inputs on a solution. Because I'm pretty sure for your submarine analogy, if you did an RFI, it would be a periscope. Like, give me a periscope that looks like this, and if you give them something else, it'll be like it's not requirements.
Do we have another question out there? Or
I have
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
a quick comment.
Yeah, please.
Just this week, I got an email to go to a customer site, and attached were a set of slides. So I'm going through them to do my homework. And it's basically they have a set of slides. They called it a reverse pitch. They sent architecture slides for everything they have. They had interviews with users as to, with their own words, unquoted, what their problems was on a daily basis. And I'm sitting there, did I win the lottery? Like, and there's no reason. And then they opened it up and they sent it to the vendors and they said, come tell us what you can do for us. And so we're going to have an informal whiteboarding session with the C-suite and just sit there and tell them this is what we can do. And all that's, and I think that allows us to address the real problems. To really collaborate in what success looks like. And I think it helps us flesh out the problems, right? Because they're not saying this is what we need from you. They're saying we know we need something, so let's work together. And that may look different, and then you unearth other problems. And it's just a process. And being able to have that conversation so early on it's really beneficial. So I would love to see more of that.
Yeah, terrific points. And Arvin, you made me think of the Einstein quote, right? If I had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 59 minutes thinking about the problem, 1 minute executing, right? And we definitely don't do that, especially with people, process, and technology. The effort here is to jump to the technological solution and bypass the process and the policy and the people and the training and change management. Do we have another question? Go ahead.
I just wanted to say one other thing. Sorry, just to say one other thing about it, which is that I feel like there are very concrete things, whether it's sandboxes or like the Blue Button 2.0, creating data access, an opportunity for us to build APIs within VA data sets, or even opportunities for tech companies to get access to VA patients to hear their problems. So I just want to reframe the problem definition is it the problems of the people who are in administration, or is it the patient problems that we're trying to solve? And having that access, I think, also would be really valuable. Sorry to be such a slow thinker.
No, thank you. I think we had another question out here. Go ahead.
Good morning, Lori Brown with Grant Thornton. We've spent some time this morning talking about how the VA or other government health agencies can leverage innovation that's already out there in the commercial or private sector. I was wondering, what are your viewpoints on what you think the VA can bring and push out to industry from an innovation standpoint?
How about if I talk to our two alums here first, based on your experience. Bill, maybe you want to kick us off.
Thanks. And this is when my thinking is slowed down. So
I can say something about this.
All right. Go ahead.
Okay. So I actually think there's a tremendous opportunity in the VA system among the faculty there and the trainees. So as you know, the VA trains residents and fellows, and I view some of what we're talking about as a little bit of a generational gap, so that I think many of the people that I work with now just view technology in just a completely different way and much more connected to how we think about the future of healthcare in just much more open-minded way, kind of like your periscope question. They would never have thought about developing a periscope in the way now because they grew up with digital imaging the way it is. And so I think that is one way in which the VA sort of leveraging the younger trainees and the people both in clinical side as well as the tech and informatics side to be the points of connection with the tech industry, for example. I think that would be one place.
So thank you for giving me a moment to collect
Okay,
my thoughts. I think one of the major challenges in healthcare right now is how do we integrate mental health back into physical health? And the VA has been, I would say, a national leader in that, co-locating in primary care mental health professionals. And so I think capitalizing on that and being able to open that innovation up to further innovations around computational brain models in AI, around technologies that look at linguistic components, around and how they can provide insight around diagnosis and therapy, around remote therapies for post-traumatic stress disorders, online counseling platforms that are driven by technology. And I think that that's really an area that's ripe for ongoing innovation between the VA, its clinicians and patients, and industry.
I think, and you mentioned this earlier, treating patients wherever they are. Yeah. I think that's something that's key, and the implications on the technology side of that are telemedicine. It's also remote monitoring, so IoT, Internet of Things. I mean, it just, and the VA has a unique model that will allow innovation to really be piloted in that way with that population and really be able to see how to best translate these buzzwords into actual patient care and patient benefit. And part of it is that we also get the feedback, right? Because I think that's part of the problem with a lot of these projects is that we don't have a captive audience. So the patients that we pilot these things on disappear. So we don't really get that feedback as to what worked and what didn't. But having that longitudinal data as well, it's pretty key.
Yeah, and I would just say again, hearkening back to the HIMSS conference this year, I heard it loud and clear. And when I came back, I sat down with Dr. Rich Stone, the head of VHA, and I said, there is such an eagerness for VA leadership in this space around health informatics and the range of topics that we're talking about. And so I can tell you that you have within the vendor and this broader industry community, you have such a willing partner in VA around that, because we realize the scale at which we operate, and certainly the importance and the spotlight, right, that is the veteran community. And again, as our two clinicians on the panel here pointed out, the fact that we have such great alumni that populate the rest of the healthcare community. So there's just such enormous opportunity, and I just can't encourage you enough to partner with us. Well, why don't we've kind of strayed into the second round of questioning, which is good. I don't have to have any hard segues here. We've talked about this government and industry collaboration, and I think we can continue that. If there's a pop-up question, I'll try to keep my eye on the audience and take that. But I'd like to also introduce a topic we talked about in our prep session. We talked about information technology as a business transformation driver, as an innovation, and then ultimately maybe creating as a value center, right? So that, a lot of times IT is seen as kind of that necessary evil, that cost center, maybe even that impediment, right? How do we get past business success or IT failure, that false choice, and really position IT as a business driver and as a value and an innovation creator? So who would like to start us off on that?
I can take that. That's,
okay.
Probably a short story that comes to my mind is way back when I was in my teens, I went to a particular hill station and I was the only person who spoke 2 languages. And for the first time in my life, I became an MVP in anything, because from a grumpy teenager, I was able to speak 2 languages that nobody did. Now, if you take that concept, if you have people like, say, Atul Gawande, he's fantastic because he speaks 2 languages, he speaks medicine, he speaks English. If you think about Warren Buffett, he's fantastic because he speaks finance, he speaks English. So people who speak multiple languages, or even if you take Andrew Ng, he speaks artificial intelligence, he speaks English. right? People who speak multiple languages are really valuable. And as long as we talk about IT and business as two different functions where they speak two different languages, you're not going to make any form of meaningful progress. You need people who can speak tech, you need people who can speak business. And the moment you make that difference of like people speaking two languages, you're going to unleash huge amounts of innovation. Because the blocker is people don't understand each other because they don't know what they're speaking.
Yeah, I'd amplify that. I mean, something that we've seen in our own experience where, you know, we started as a company that built products that were sort of horizontal platforms for everybody, and there wasn't really any differentiation back in the day of Windows for health or Windows for anything else. It's the same kind of Windows. And as the cloud has evolved, you know, we've taken efforts and invested in a lot more of domain-specific expertise where, you know, for instance, now we've got a dedicated health R&D group called Health Next, which is populated with close to 100 PhDs that speak medicine and tech, and are looking at some of these forward scenarios, like how you would apply artificial intelligence, right? I mentioned earlier the concept of a bot listening in the background to an encounter between a doc and a patient and transcribing all that stuff. That's actually a live project. Mm-hmm. That's called Empower MD, and it's in our incubation area now. University of Pittsburgh Medical Center is where we're, you know, testing that, and we think that's going to grow and become a bigger thing. And so it would be critically important to have the domain expertise and the technology expertise together. It's hard to find in one person, I'll warrant that, you know, but with the younger community, I like the idea of the, you know, the trainees and the residents and VA, et cetera, who are already likely digital natives. You know, those that just may be coming out of med school now might be digital natives who would be a lot more adept at talking and thinking about what's possible.
I think that we're way past the point where IT was a back office function. It now is the enabler for everything, mission, front office, nothing gets done without technology. And so what we and other technology companies have tried to do is create platforms that lend themselves to sort of a democratic approach to technology, where it's no longer entirely the province of the IT department, but it's something that is the basis for a conversation and for agile development and iteration between business and technology. And I think that creates rapid success and faster cycles, but it also creates that common language of understanding where it's no longer the IT department takes what they think are the requirements and then they come back months or even longer and bring you something. It's really an ongoing process of co-creation. And so I think there's so many customer success stories from that kind of approach in every industry that it's got a lot of momentum.
Yeah. Alex?
To expand on that point, I think it's really the connecting the dots between what a successful IT implementation looks like and what a business success looks like. And I think we disconnect those things. I've been witness to a lot of very successful IT implementations that then were shelved because there was no user uptake. And so you would ask anyone in the IT side and said, we did our due diligence. I mean, everything was great, and the implementation was, you know, only 10% over, and you look, then you ask the users, are you using it? Are you getting any value of it? And they're not. So I think that's really where there's a disconnect, is that we're not having the conversation of what success looks like across those two pillars.
So I would say the era of Marcus Welby is dead. There's no such thing as a mom and pop pharmacist. There's no such thing, or it's a dying breed of the solo doc in northern New Hampshire who's just operating on his own. 21st century medicine is so complex with so many different players that the only way that we're going to drive the outcomes that we care about in the 21st century are through business acumen. And the only way that we're going to address business acumen is to have an almost real-time view of our patients' health, of their social issues, of the cost and the quality with predictive models that drive insight at every level, from the patient, from the clinician, from the VP of medical affairs or the clinical leader to the business leader, to the health department official and the agency head. And the only way we're going to do that is through technology.
I'm just going to build on what Bill just said with a personal example. So in a previous life, I was the CEO of the health system at the University of Utah. And I had the great fortune of overseeing a second Epic implementation. I had just left an institution where we finished one, and I got to be a part of a second one. And so there was a lot of frustration among our physicians, and why are we spending all this money on this, you know, the usual big sucking sound into IT. And we went through an experience very similar to what Bill was just talking about, trying to use our data to quantify value. Everybody was talking about value. We had to measure value, we had to deliver on value. And so we used our data to create a tool for our frontline physicians to measure their patient outcomes and various quality metrics, as well as the actual cost of care. So what it actually cost each physician to care for their patient with diabetes or heart failure, or to do a joint replacement or whatever it was. And we enabled them to look at their actual cost of care and to compare themselves across all the other clinicians who were doing the same, taking care of the same kind of patients. And we sort of tapped into a little bit of that type A competitive personality thing. And it actually turned out to be incredibly enlightening for all of us who are on the front lines. I mean, most of us have no idea what it costs to care for our patients and what supplies cost or pharma cost. We really don't see much of that. And so once we gave that data to the clinicians, it really drove a lot of behavior change. And actually, in the end, doubled our margin. We actually doubled our margin over a 2 or 3 year period, which made our CFO happy. So when the CIO can make the CFO happy and the chief quality officer happy, then we've really hit success.
And I did not even pay her to do this, but you have segued into the one topic we didn't talk about I want to touch on, because I know with my private sector clients in my past life, I watched CIOs and CISOs struggle mightily with creating that value proposition and justifying budgets. Couldn't even have the same language with the CFO, right? You might as well have been on different, 2 different planets, or from 2 different planets. So one of the things in the federal space that is part of the presidential management agenda is around technology business management. And so this is kind of a niche topic, right? So we are driving IT offices with their customers to quantify the spend, to capture it in wave 1, and in wave 2 to take that data around those TBM tools and make it more predictive around all of those cost aspects that you just mentioned. You kind of already started going down that path. I don't know if you want to go any farther, or if anybody else wants to touch that topic around how imperative is it, again, maybe around that value proposition, not only within the IT shop, but also with the business, to quantify and show that. Number one, the need for the resources, right? I mean, I had a former boss once said, vision without resources is a hallucination, right? If you can't get the resources to justify your program, how are you going to support the business? And have that conversation with the CFO.
Yeah, so I'll just elaborate a tiny bit more, and then I'd love to hear what the other panelists have to say about it. So clearly, if our goal is to drive towards improved outcomes, let's just make sure that we never forget that part, because often we're really focused on the resources, but we are driving for improved outcomes. And we know that as quality improves, for the most part, actually costs do come down. So the two do create a virtuous cycle. What we're trying to do right now is to reap the returns of all the investments we're already making in IT. And those investments are at a system level, but they're also at an individual clinician level. Every clinician, nurse, physician, whoever who spends time entering data into those data systems is making an investment. And what we're simply trying to do now is to quantify and yield the greatest return on the investment. And the one point that I want to make about that is the more that we can provide that data to each hospital administrator, to each frontline nurse or physician or pharmacist, for them to be able to measure improved patient outcomes and reduced cost of care, gets their buy-in into this whole IT system. It's not just putting data into this black hole and who knows what's going to be done with that. It's actually providing that data and then feedback back to them on their performance. This is how we're doing in pharmacy management, formulary management, which the VA does really, really well. And this is why we're making that investment in data. And the more everyone feels a part of that mission, the better the data are, and the more predictives, the more powerful the predictives are that we can do. And we just create a learning health system, and that's really what we're trying to build.
Anybody else want to?
I'll
Yeah.
just add to that really quickly. I've built probably 1,000 dashboards in my lifetime, and I think the only point that I would add to that is that we need to make sure that it's actionable when we provide that feedback, because I think sometimes we provide nebulous feedback on that data, and it's value, but it's over here. So it's really when the person is interacting with that information needs to know how to keep doing what they're doing or change what they're doing. And I think that's part of that speaking two languages is now you're going from data, IT, to like the everyday operations of someone's job. And I think we just need to be that familiar with it to be able to be successful.
So that got me thinking that the economist Joseph Schumpeter said it's not enough to make soap, you have to get people to use it. And so we have a long history of creating wonderful, beautiful evidence-based guidelines that docs don't use, or dashboards that aren't used. And so a couple of thoughts are on that. First is the real importance of human-centered design and understanding how people interact with technology, I would say the anti-EHR view, if you will. And the offering that you just shared around the diabetes, and we have something very similar, I think begins to get to that, which is how people take in information, relate to their technology is huge. I'll also go back to say we have to think systems and workflow and adjust the dysfunctional workflow as we develop these dashboards and tools. Otherwise, we're not going to get value.
I'll probably just add a word of caution. I think like the metrics are beautiful, but metrics influence behavior, and wrong metrics influence the wrong behavior. I generally am wary of CFO metrics, because CFO metrics go down to margin and everything that is related to money, but I think like Vivian was alluding earlier to also patient outcomes. The more you go to the second order metrics and say like how does it impact the core thing that we care about, that's super useful. I mean, we were incredibly focused on let's have an impact at Facebook. We had an impact. We should have probably put a positive in front of it, right? So it's really important for you to qualify like the kind of metrics that you're going after.
Right. Bill and Vivian, I know Bill mentions human-centered design, and Casey, I want to come to you from the customer standpoint, the patient standpoint. So there seems to be, again, kind of one of these false narratives or false choices being created around human-centered design. Ultimately, it is about the patient and the care that's delivered to the patient, in my case, the veteran. But it sometimes hurdles over the role of the clinician and that discussion and that interaction, right? We're developing apps, especially around the new Mission Act, to give veterans access to some of that data, but at the end, it still has to be a conversation with the clinician. Can you all talk about that, and then maybe we can talk about how your company is doing more work in terms of that direct customer access?
So, as I think about that clinician-patient interaction, let's use adherence to medication as a really good challenge. It's typically me saying, here, you need to take this, it's for your own good, I'm going to prescribe it. And then they go off, and 6 months later, they'll come back and their blood pressure isn't raised. It's like, well, they didn't take the med because they couldn't afford it, because they didn't believe it, they thought there were side effects. I need information at my fingertips as a prescriber about what is my patient's preference, what is their view on illness and side effects, what do they understand, what are their barriers in terms of being able to afford the medication, being able to go to a pharmacy and get that medication, and so I can write a prescription that is adherable. At the same time, my patient needs to have a better understanding of what their thinking is, what are the issues around their belief about their illness, the side effects that they may have, the stories that they've heard, their culture. And so being able to empower individuals with information that they get, being able to counsel patients around what are their issues to improve self-efficacy, and giving me, the prescriber, the tools I need in real time. That's where I think this technology will provide the most value.
Can I challenge something?
Of course.
Do you have the time to do that?
Yeah.
Exact, and that is where the technology is. If I had at my fingertips what the formulary management was, if I understood about patient preference, if the patient came in able to articulate her preferences, those are all ways in which technology can help at that incredible point of care.
There is an elephant in the room, which is the administrative overload in healthcare just generally. I mean, the VA system is actually better than the civilian side, but nationally we spend 25% of our healthcare dollar on administration. You know, for every physician, we talk about the pajama time at night doing the documentation. So there is fundamentally an elephant in the room on that, and some of that maybe technology can solve, but some of it actually is a system-wide problem. I think we should just really just acknowledge that. I do feel, though, back to the original points about the augmented intelligence, and I think Bill is also alluding to this, that the AI capabilities of trying to not only help us understand, as clinicians, help us understand our patients better and to target our interventions in a more effective way, but also make us more effective practitioners. So for some of us, like in my own field as a radiologist, computer-assisted diagnosis is going to significantly speed me up. I'm actually not that worried about it replacing me. I think it's just going to augment me. So I think it's going to enable me to read images much faster and much more accurately, and maybe some of the simple studies I don't even hardly need to look at at all. So it'll improve my efficiency, and hopefully that'll create greater access for our patients by making our physicians.
Yeah, I was actually going right where you were, Bill, with the social side of care and the social determinants of care. I don't remember what the percentage is, but some significant percentage of one's overall health is determined not on the quality of the clinical care, but the other social factors that, do people understand the prescription? Are they taking the medication? Do they have a supportive home environment? Do they have the information they need to make their own conclusions? And so that social side of things, and connecting those dots and considering the patient to be the unifying factor and at the center of everything we do, the customer, so to speak, is vital. And that's one of the things we're trying to really tackle, is how do we connect all those pieces, and I mentioned earlier clinical and non-clinical, but all of the different elements, all the different systems, connecting those in a way that is centered around the patient is a huge factor toward contributing to better outcomes, and also to unifying the dialogue between IT and the business or mission side, because that is the thing that connects everything, is that shared sense of mission, that shared objective.
Yeah. Just want to do a question check in the audience here. We're going to move on to kind of the final wave. Go ahead.
Ken Bauman from Unison. My question for y'all is this. I've been in healthcare my entire life. I've spent most of my time in technology. Did some pioneering in telemedicine back in the 90s. That's been around since the 70s. And you talk about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room in healthcare, for me, seems to be how long it takes us in healthcare to do about anything. Let me back that. How long does it take us to get a drug that we know can solve a problem to market? Right? How long does it take for the provider community or healthcare in general to say this works, it's now a standard of care? Telemedicine is a good example of technology. I've heard for years, going back to when the VA started and DoD started playing with telemedicine, you have pilots all over the place. The efficacy, the benefits have been proven time and time again. But it took many, many years for it to be implemented into a standard of practice, just one of the tools in the bag of the provider. And why was that? Probably adoption, and not adoption by the provider, but adoption by the whole community, including policymakers. So how do we solve that problem? Because there are a lot of new things coming up. Blockchain, I could go on a list, AI, the data, all the things come up, but the problem seems to be getting it into that standard practice of care and getting it into the hands of the people that can make use of it and work it. And it just seems to take so long to do that.
Bill?
So I think this is not a technology problem, but a culture and a system problem. I think we know from behavioral economics and from cognitive psychology that creating choice architecture in systems is the best way to drive behavior. And so I would look to systems level thinking, to operations research, what we know around behavioral economics, to create systems that make it easier for the clinicians and for our patients and citizens to do the right thing.
I probably think like the best way I've seen for bringing any change is to find the smallest place where you can actually do the thing that you want to do and point that as example to many people. The part is like, I fully agree with your point that you're making on velocity so slow. If I want to make a change, I'm completely slowed down by a bunch of things. But are there places where there can be something that can be brought in which can be really quick, and you can start pointing to that as days instead of like hours, and you create a vortex around it. That's the best way that I've seen industries being disrupted. Take example of, when Google Maps came out, it was a fantastic product, but until you had an Uber which said like, here is how I could monetize it, you don't change an industry. So you got to find something like that that seems very benign at beginning, but is highly disruptive.
I hear in your question almost a challenge to Jim and to the VA leadership, because I feel like there's so many vested interests in the civilian side. It's more complicated with multiple payers and multiple delivery systems. And then you have employed and non-employed physicians, and you just have such, the VA system, there's a reason why the VA system has outperformed civilian health. And why not take it to the next level? Why not say, okay, this is the ideal system for creating unique new partnerships, as you say, between industry and government. We do need to simplify a little bit the approval process and some of the other things, but that's a perfect challenge for this organization. And the real advantage for me for the VA is, well, there's a couple. First, there's just the mission. Nobody can argue with the mission. I mean, we all owe it to our veterans to support them. But also, one of the real challenges that I see is scalability. So I feel like there are many, many point solutions. Like everywhere, there are little case studies where this hospital does an amazing thing, this clinic. We never seem to be able to scale across the country. And the VA is a national system. It's a national system. So if we can create, if the administration can rise to the challenge and we can have the VA be a test case for the rest of the country, I think we could see amazing change.
Over to me, right?
We're hoping the answer is yes.
It's not mission hard, it's mission impossible. No, in all seriousness, I agree with Vivian's assessment. And the big challenge now along this big electronic health record migration is how do we scale that across the enterprise and bring the beauty, the creativity, the value of a lot of Vista and the current architecture is it allowed 174 flowers to bloom, right? You had that autonomy and that opportunity. How do you standardize but not dampen that creativity? I mean, how do you bring the value of scale but also not smother the innovation that's inside of that scale? So I don't know. If I knew that question, we'll figure it out.
But Jim, the VA is also challenged because, and I don't know the right proportion, but a significant amount of vets aren't seen within the walls of the VA system, through shared care, through fee basis, through vets that just don't access the system but are seen. And so, yes, you can do amazing things within your walls as a great crucible for innovation and for choice architecture. But the VA also needs to get out and look broader than its walls to interact with the civilian health system, to train those civilian docs, to seek out where the vets are getting their care, where they're not, but are seen by government agencies and safety net providers. Right. And I think that technology can play a role in that.
Yeah, and to Bill's point, right, about 30% of our care in aggregate is in the community. It gets debatable where that number will go in the future. But then also those partnerships with the community care network, the fact that of the 20+ million veterans, only about 9 million are in the VHA system. I mean, if there's one lesson for those of you that live in your communities, when you've got young men and women and old men and women, for that case like me, that are transitioning out, please convey to them they need to get into the VA system. We're certainly trying to make it more of an entitlement push as opposed to an entitlement pull. But I still run into people, it's like, you know, I just didn't bother. It's like, you know, if this is something that you need to follow up on, and, you know, from a medical standpoint, at least get the conditions that you incurred over 4 years or 34 years, get them rated, get them evaluated, get a 0% rating, and then, you know, you have the opportunity for care later on. Okay, well, I think we need to go to our last, okay, well, one quick question, then we need to get on to our last wave. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in the, Rachel Foster, Thought Leadership Innovation Foundation. I'm very interested in the discussion on the use of social determinants, especially in the population health area. And it's obvious to me the sources of data for other types of healthcare, right? Like you look at the pharmacy record, you look at the electronic health record. But what are the panel's thoughts on the sources of information for the social determinants? Because that's a little less obvious, right? There's social media, there's where people live, there's this cultural, educational, that sort of thing. And it's a sort of a new area, but I think it's critical. I'm just sort of curious how you see pulling that data and integrating that data into the interaction with the patient without making it onerous on the clinician.
Maybe we could limit to 2 responses.
Coming from the public health world, I'm so glad you asked. I'm a big fan of the Area Deprivation Index, which is census data, 17, it's a compound metric of 17 individual census questions. It's at the zip code and sub-zip code level, and it is highly predictive of clinical outcomes such as hospital readmissions, age and race-adjusted mortality and morbidity. So simply including the ADI in standard risk models is a first step. But then beyond that, collaborating with public health departments, with using surveillance data, using behavioral risk factor surveillance system, or the myriad of systems that state and local and federal CDCs has, can additionally provide fine level area insights that help with risk models. And then lastly, there are a number of assessments, and when I was at CMMI and we developed the Accountable Health Communities model, there's simply a 10-question screener. So you can use the ADI to identify people that come from deprived zip codes, and then by simply asking 10 questions, you can get a handle on whether there are housing issues, whether there are transportation issues, and if they're on Medicaid, they're eligible for a cab voucher. And so those are sort of, I'd say, basic strategies.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and move on. And I think we have this on tape. So at the ACT-IAC Health Innovation Day 2029, I think the plan is to play this tape back and see who comes closest to getting it right. But put your futurist hat on, and we're thinking about 10 years from now. What does patient care look like a decade from now? How will technology have changed the way providers and patients interact? What will be the new normal? Why don't we start down with Vivian, and we'll just kind of work our way down.
Well, that question reminds me of, I think, was it a Bill Gates line who said that people tend to overestimate what can happen in a year and underestimate what happens in 10. Yeah. So I'm going to maybe be a little bit more ambitious than, even though we are slow in healthcare. I actually think that the intersection of technology, the ability to collect big data, and just the incredible desire for change across most of healthcare has gotten us close to that tipping point if we aren't already past it. And so that's why I think there actually is going to be a significant amount of change in the next decade. And it's, in my mind, it is going to come back to it's going to come back to this model, for the most part, of population health, and a population health perspective, thinking about how do we maintain health and not sickness, and how do we really think about the co-production of health. This idea of co-production came around when we shifted from manufacturing industry to more of a service industry, but again, in healthcare, we've been the last to come to it. So in education, co-production just means like you go to PTA conferences and you help your kids with homework at night, you know, or with trash, you bring your trash out to the street, you don't expect them to come to your house. Well, in healthcare, we haven't really embraced this idea of co-production so much, but I think technology is going to enable us to do that. So whether it's measuring your own continuous glucose monitoring or your diet or your sleep, I'm a big fan of sleep, and then kind of getting those insights, how do you and your family can care for your health better, and then similarly sharing those insights with your clinician, with other data and information about you, whether it's social determinants or better information from your imaging or whatever it is, so that they can work better with you and you can co-produce your health better. I think that's going to be our new model, and hopefully the payment models will align with that.
I agree a lot with Vivian's characterization of what will happen, but in terms of the precursor to that, I think that's more useful to talk about, to add a little bit more color. I think data, when people say data is oil, they think it's actually wrong. Data is the new snake oil, because it's like there's way too much and it is not clear. It's right data which is the new oil, not big data. So I think what's going to be the precursor to this is the ability to collect and combine this data in really intelligent ways. So we launched in Palantir an initiative with Merck called Syntropy, which is really about bringing data together to make it available for researchers, such that they can do first order research and help patients and truly have personalized medicine. I mean, you have personalized ads today, so why not personalized medicine, right? For the amount of data that's been collected. I really think getting insights from the data ecosystem that you build is going to be the precursor to what Vivian was describing.
So I think the future vision is that of integrated care. And right now we have a sick care system that's highly fractured between primary care and acute care and specialty care over multiple venues, whether you have disability or long-term care, if you're in a veterans, a VHA facility, if you're in a community. And then we have a whole safety net of community psychosocial support agencies that are nonprofit, and then we have governmental public health and safety net, and these systems don't talk to each other, and as a result, it's not delivering outcomes that we care about. It's not responsive to individuals and their needs, nor to the caregiver. So an integrated care would be using data, using technology to leverage relationships, to overcome those silos, and to integrate clinical care with public health, with human services and social services in order to provide true care and health for the individual. I do worry at night, though, about one aspect of the technology, and we have to address it now. Otherwise, I think we're going to go from the dream to the nightmare. And that is that some of these technologies, particularly around machine learning and AI, have biases. At the same time, they're addressing cognitive biases that we think about and that we operate on and that are problematic to us. They introduce biases in terms of how the data is collected, how it's trained, and may codify biased and inaccurate and old-style ways of thinking. So I think that's the challenge for us in the industry. Is as we think about these wonderful future visions of integrated care or empowerment or microdata, that we have to address the issue of bias now.
I was thinking about this question on the flight over, and it dawned on me that 10 years from now, millennials are going to be in their mid-30s and 40s. And this is going to be the point where a lot of people are going to start interacting a little bit differently with healthcare. They're either going to be taking care of their children or their parents or themselves as life goes. And I think this is from there on. It's just 10 years is a long time. It really is. And I think the biggest changes are going to be what we're seeing now, which is the way we're consuming healthcare, that we're consuming. I remember reading somewhere that that the new generation is going to expect from their healthcare what they expect from Target, right? And that interaction, that personalization. And I think some of the problems we're discussing today is about the uptake of technology. I think we're not going to be dealing with the uptake of technology as much as who we are now that technology has changed us. I think that's really what's going to happen in 10 years, and we're just going to have a different set of problems, I think.
Yeah, I think I think about myself in 10 years, right? And what I would like to see. And I think it's actually possible we can get there. Recent story. So last winter I was ill and had a cold, and I wanted to go to the Minute Clinic at my local CVS to see if I could get some medicine for it, right? And there was a good hour-and-a-half wait for that, right? Luckily, my company a little bit before that had contracted with a telemedicine provider, which had an app on my phone. And so I went to my car, sat in my car, fired up that app for the first time, and within 15 minutes I had a prescription for a Z-Pack, and I picked it up and crawled back home, right? And I think that sort of interaction is going to become a lot more common, going forward. Yeah, like the millennials, the digital natives, they're going to expect to interact with their doc that way. I mean, I know I've been frustrated for a while that I can't just call my doc up and say, hey, this is my problem. Why do I have to go in and see you? Why do I have to fill out all this stuff in paper? And so I think we're going to get more to that front. I think we may also see more interactivity with bots. So another interesting thing that I see happening, our insurer at our company actually has a bot interface now that we've exposed out through, I think, Facebook Messenger. And you can interact with that insurer that way through, a secure messaging environment to ask, questions related to your care and get referrals to folks. And all in a, secure HIPAA environment. So we'll probably see more of that at the front end, for determining, okay, is this a cold or is this the flu? Right? The cold, it's a virus, Z-Pack's not going to do much for you. Flu, maybe it will. So I think we'll see a lot more of that, which will hopefully then lower some of the cost of care, certainly increase the accessibility, and even to underserved communities, because the phones are really, widely distributed now.
I was going to hit on the theme of accessibility also. I think the future of healthcare is connected, it's personalized, it's delivered where you are in the way you want to take advantage of it, but I hope it's also accessible, because today, if you have a healthcare situation, you have to be your own advocate, you have to do the research, you have to connect the dots. And I hope that, and that your ability to do that depends on socioeconomic factors and education and other factors. And so I hope that in the future that through AI, through bots, through other technologies, predictive analytics, that healthcare becomes much more accessible in every way to underserved communities and to people who are just dealing with their own health issues. It's enough of a burden to do that and to not have to take on the care of being your own patient advocate the way we do now.
Great. Well, I think we're right at time. I'd like to thank our panelists today. The Reagan quote is always, I don't want to be the smartest person in the room, or in this case on the stage. I love it because that's the case today. I appreciate my very smart colleagues and thank them for their today, and I thanked IAC for allowing us to have this panel.